They laughed when I walked into the mansion wearing a borrowed suit. Her family called me nothing. But by the end of the night, every single one of them was on their feet. Because the truth finally walked in with me. Marrying into wealth was supposed to mean love, acceptance, and a fresh start. Instead, it meant whispers behind my back, insults disguised as jokes, and being treated like I didn't belong. What they never bothered to ask was who I was before I arrived. This is the story of how judgment blinded them, and how truth changed everything. From the very first moment I stepped into their world, I could feel the judgment settle on me like a shadow that refused to lift. It wasn't spoken outright at first, but it lived in the glances they exchanged, the pauses that stretched a little too long after I answered a question, the polite smiles that never quite reached their eyes. I wasn't introduced by my name as much as I was introduced by my lack of wealth. To them, I wasn't a partner, a husband, or even a person with a story. I was a mistake that had somehow slipped past their standards. Family dinners became the hardest test of all. What should have been warm conversations quickly turned into carefully disguised interrogation. "So, what exactly do you do again?" they'd ask, leaning back in their chairs as if presiding over a trial. When I spoke about my work, they nodded slowly, the way people do when they've already decided it isn't impressive. Comments followed, wrapped in fake curiosity suggestions that I should aim higher, find something more stable, or learn from people who had real success. Laughter often followed, soft but sharp enough to sting, and I learned to smile through it as if I didn't notice. My background was treated like a flaw that needed fixing. Where I came from was always brought up, never out of interest, but as a quiet reminder that I didn't belong. They talked about private schools, generational wealth, and family legacies as if those things were proof of character. When my story didn't include those privileges, it was dismissed as irrelevant, or worse, embarrassing. In their eyes, struggle wasn't something to respect, it was something to look down on. What hurt most wasn't the insults themselves, but the assumption behind them. They believed money defined worth, that bank accounts measured intelligence, discipline, and value. Because I didn't arrive with visible wealth, they assumed I lacked ambition, intelligence, and direction. They never considered that success could be quiet, or that someone could choose a simpler life after earning more than enough. To them, if it wasn't loud, expensive, and on display, it didn't count. Still, I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I understood something they didn't. I knew the nights I had worked until exhaustion, the risks I had taken when failure was the only guarantee, and the victories I had achieved without applause. I knew what it felt like to build something from nothing, to lose it, and to build again stronger. Their opinions couldn't erase that history, and I didn't need their approval to validate it. So I listened, I observed, and I waited. I didn't argue, didn't correct them, didn't feel the need to prove myself in the moment, because I knew that truth has a way of surfacing on its own, and when it did, it wouldn't need defending. Before this marriage, my life was anything but simple. I started with nothing, no safety net, no wealthy relatives, no shortcuts, just an idea, a stubborn belief in myself, and a willingness to work when no one was watching. I failed more times than I succeeded. There were nights I slept in my office, days when rejection felt personal, and moments when quitting seemed like the smartest option. But every failure taught me something. I learned how to rebuild from the ground up, how to adapt, and how to lead without arrogance. Over time, those lessons turned into quiet success. I built companies that solved real problems, created jobs, and grew beyond what I ever imagined. Yet I never chased attention or applause. I avoided headlines, turned down interviews, and stayed out of rooms where ego mattered more than effort. Wealth came as a result, not a goal, and when it did, I treated it carefully. I learned that money changes how people see you, often before they try to understand you. So I stepped away not because I lost everything, but because I had already proven everything to myself. I sold my shares, trusted capable leaders to carry things forward, and chose a life that valued peace over pressure. When I met her, none of that mattered. She didn't ask about my bank account or my past achievements. She asked about my values, my scars, and what kind of future I wanted to build. That was new to me. Refreshing, real. I didn't marry into her family hoping to gain status or security. I already had both in ways that mattered to me. I married because I found someone who loved me for who I was when no one else was watching. So when her family judged me, I stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but out of confidence. I didn't correct their assumptions when they labeled me average or unambitious. I didn't flash credentials or stories to earn their respect. I believed that character would speak louder than a resume, and for a long time it did just not loudly enough for them to hear. But there's a limit to patience. When mockery turns into cruelty, silence becomes permission. They pushed too far when they questioned my worth as a partner, as a provider, as a man. That was the moment I realized humility should never require self-erasure. I didn't reveal my past to prove I was better than them. I revealed it to remind them and myself that worth isn't granted by wealth, approval, or privilege. It's built in the unseen years, in the failures no one applauds, and in the choices you make when no one is keeping score. The room was glowing with excess crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, waiters gliding between guests with trays of champagne that cost more than my first apartment. Laughter floated easily, but not toward me. I stood near the edge of the crowd, exactly where they seemed to prefer I stay. The jokes had grown sharper as the night went on. Comments about my luck marrying well. Smiles that carried insults just beneath the surface. I felt them, circling, confident, comfortable in their belief that I was small. Then the lights dimmed. The host announced the keynote speaker, a respected figure in the industry, someone this family admired, even feared. Conversations hushed as he stepped onto the stage, commanding attention without raising his voice. I watched my in-laws straighten their posture, suddenly eager, suddenly polite. This was their world, their territory, or so they thought. The speaker began by talking about perseverance, about unseen struggles and quiet leadership. His words felt uncomfortably close to home. Then he paused, scanned the room, and smiled. Before I continue, he said, I want to acknowledge someone here tonight, someone without whom my company and, frankly, my life would not be what it is today. A murmur rippled through the audience. He said my name. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Glasses froze midair. Smiles collapsed. My mother-in-law's laugh cut off so sharply it echoed. I felt every eye swing toward me, disbelief painted across familiar faces. The speaker gestured in my direction, inviting me to stand. My legs felt heavy, but I rose anyway. He spoke of the early days, when no one believed in the idea. How I had invested not just money, but time, guidance, and trust. How I had stepped back when success came, choosing anonymity over applause. He listed titles I had never used in this family's presence, achievements I had never defended, sacrifices I had never explained. With each sentence, their confidence drained away. The same people who dismissed me now searched my face, trying to reconcile the man. They mocked with the story unfolding on stage. Power shifted in real time. The room no longer belonged to them, it responded to the truth. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then thunderous. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I simply nodded in thanks and sat back down. In that moment, I understood something deeply freeing. I had never been powerless. I had only been patient. And patience, when paired with truth, has a way of rewriting every room it enters. Respect finally replaced ridicule, but I didn't celebrate their shock. I didn't smile at their sudden politeness or enjoy the way their voices softened when they spoke to me. There was no victory in watching people change only after the truth became convenient for them. I stood taller in that moment, not because they finally approved of me, but because I never needed their approval to begin with. Their acceptance didn't add value to my life, and their rejection had never taken it away. What changed wasn't who I was, it was what they finally chose to see. For a long time I had carried myself quietly, absorbing the weight of their judgment without letting it shape my identity. Every sideways glance, every dismissive comment, every laugh meant to remind me I didn't belong, had tested my patience and my character. I could have lashed out. I could have defended myself with facts and titles, but I learned early on that true confidence doesn't beg for recognition. It waits. It endures, and when the truth finally stands on its own, it speaks louder than any argument ever could. When their tone shifted from condescension to respect, I realized something important. People often treat you based on what they think you are worth, not on who you actually are. And that realization freed me. I no longer felt the need to prove myself, because I had already survived being underestimated. I had built myself in silence, and no one could take that away from me. Not their words, not their doubts, not their late apologies. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but it came deliberately. I forgave them not because they deserved it, but because I refused to let bitterness live rent-free in my heart. Holding on to resentment would have kept me tied to the very people who once tried to diminish me. Letting go was an act of strength, not weakness. It was me choosing peace over pride, growth over grudges. In forgiving them, I reclaimed my power. I stopped replaying old moments in my head and stopped wishing they had treated me differently. The past no longer needed to be rewritten for me to move forward. I understood that their behavior had more to do with their fears and assumptions than with my reality. And once I saw that clearly, their opinions lost their weight. I walked away from that chapter with my head high and my heart steady, not because I had finally been validated, but because I had always been enough. Respect may have arrived late, but self-worth had been with me from the beginning. And in the end, that was the only thing that truly mattered. Never let anyone's judgment define you. Sometimes your story isn't meant to be explained, it's meant to be revealed. Stay humble, stay strong, and remember, the quietest person in the room often carries the loudest truth.